What's much less appreciated, I think, than the IT story is just how important India's manufacturing story is. Conventional wisdom has it that China is a manufacturing power, India is a services power. This conventional wisdom is 5 years out of date at least. China is developing a services sector and India's manufacturing is booming. Last year, the year of the Great Recession, global recession, India's manufacturing sector grew 11%. Agriculture shrank, which is why India only grew at 6.7%. And the most sort of symbolic moment for India overcoming its export pessimism, as they called it, in manufacturing was about 3 years ago with a major acquisition internationally. It reminded me of a colonial story. A century ago, the first Indian entrepreneur ever to attempt to produce steel, a guy called Sir Jamshed Tata, set up a steel company in eastern India in the state of Bihar. And the head of Indian Railways, a colonial officer called Sir Frederick Upcutt, was so sort of scathing about the ability of any Indian entrepreneur to produce steel that he pledged to eat every ounce of steel that Tata could produce. Well, Tata set up Tata Steel, and Tata Steel in 2007 took over in a acquisition, cross-border acquisition, $12 billion acquisition, a company called Chorus. Chorus is what was formerly known as British Steel. So Britain's entire steel production is owned by the man who couldn't produce an ounce of steel. And this was an extraordinarily sort of symbolic moment in India for a coming of age of a manufacturing sector that could not only export and compete, but could also buy up big Western, impressive Western companies. And if you look at the difference between China and India, China is, I'd say, 10 years in advance of India. But there are certain strengths that India has that China doesn't possess. And one of them is a private sector that doesn't depend on government support, that is not the basis of joint ventures with foreign partners, but which is entirely homegrown, which is not built on debt, but which grows organically through its own capital generation. And these are extremely well-managed companies. That it's not a complete stretch of the imagination to imagine within 2-3 years Infosys, for example, one of India's top IT companies, taking over, say, IBM, or Tata Motors, which is part of the Tata family, taking over General Motors, although why it would want to, I have no idea. Or ICICI Bank taking over a Citibank, ditto. It's an immensely impressive and underappreciated feature of the Indian economic renaissance, or not renaissance, naissance, is the manufacturing